Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time center of pestilence. And trust me, I will be even more of a center of pestilence after this one. And in this video, I'm going to be having a conversation about something I've wanted to talk about for a really long time, but haven't necessarily made it in YouTube form. I've said some of these things on Twitter, on my podcast, but I thought it would be good to actually put in a video because I think the people on YouTube are the people who need to hear this. And that would be a lot of people who talk about and teach about the occult, paganism, mysticism, esotericism online are lying to you. They are completely lying to you, and they are giving you information that will ultimately harm you in your spiritual journey. Now, the occult is real, and the occult is not a bad thing. I am an occultist, I'm a mystic, I'm a pagan, I'm whatever you want to call me, right? But I have a serious problem with a lot of the online community, and some of these lies are so spread around that I believe them myself. You know, things I've said online, I disagree with some of the stuff I used to say online. That's normal, that's natural. All creators disagree with their past. And, you know, all the times I've said stuff like this, I think I was wrong. And I'm sure in the future there will be things I say now that I think I'm wrong about. And I guess I should just get into what I'm talking about. Because the thing is, the things that I think they're lying to you about are kind of multiple things, right? They're lying to you about how the community works, they're lying to you about theology, and they're lying to you about how a path tends to actually go. So, without further ado, I'll just break into it. The first lie of the occult community is that you need a ton of tools. Now, obviously, certain spiritual practices require tools, right? People use things to do mysticism, right? They use things to do occultism. They use things to do paganism. But I think people think they need a lot more than they actually do. And I think a lot of new practitioners go out and buy a lot of stuff that they then never actually use, right? When you read a lot of these like beginner pagan books that are really circulating, there's always like a list of altar supplies, a list of stuff you have to buy. And I think a lot of people are buying things without knowing what those things are for. And then inevitably they're not going to use them and they will have just wasted money. When buying things for your spiritual practice, you should be conscious with what you're getting, right? You should be thinking about, okay, I want this, what will I use it for, how will I use it, and how will that advance my practice, right? Just because someone else uses a tool or just because another tradition uses a tool doesn't mean you actually will. So only buy things that you will use. And I think a good metric for if you should buy an occult tool is if it meets these criteria. 1, it is something that is relevant to your tradition. 2, you know what it is and you know how to use it, and you're at a point in your practice where you can actually use it, right? Don't buy some aspirational tool that you want to use one day that you're not actively using, right? Buy what you need now, what you understand, and what you'll think you use. And if you are not using a tool, you can hold on to it if you want, but you can sometimes just want to get rid of it or give it to someone else, or, you know, give it to someone else you know, or something like that, because I do find that clutter is not always good spiritually. Recently, I offloaded a bunch of my old occult books. I took them to a used bookstore and I sold them, right? The ones that I was not reading, those that I was not using, and some of my old tools I gave as a gift to one of my friends who's getting into spirituality, because I was like, this is just clutter. It's cluttering my mind. And as we know, the microcosm and the macrocosm are related, right? As above, so below. If your space is cluttered, your mind is cluttered. And so it can be good to just like get it out, purge it out, and make sure you're only having what you need. And since I've really thought about that and been more conscious about it, I've saved a lot of money, but also I've been more sort of, I don't know, what I use, and it makes me feel more grateful for it, and I find that I'm reaching for my tools more than I did before, when I had more stuff that I wasn't necessarily using. The next lie is more of a philosophic lie than a like practical, mundane, day-to-day practice lie, and that would be that virtue and morality do not matter. Now, I think a lot of people, when they get into this stuff, I see this especially with the witchy crowd, right? They're like, well, I'm not a Christian, so I don't have to follow any rules. I don't have to follow any morals. I can do whatever I want. And I think this has resulted with this culture where people think it's like cool and great to hurt other people spiritually, right? To use your spiritual practice just to harm others. Not saying that that's always a bad thing, right? I'm not a turn the other cheek gal. I think that strength, self-defense, stuff like that are within paganism, particularly if you're a pagan. If you're not a pagan, this applies a little less, right? But fundamentally, you should be trying to be a good person with your spiritual practice. Your spiritual practice should be trying to make you better, trying to get you closer to gnosis, trying to get you to the state of attainment, right? And if you are spending your entire spiritual practice attacking others, hurting others, you're not doing that. It doesn't make you cool, it makes you a bitch. And I'm sorry to put it like that, but that's the truth. I get that this was kind of a reaction to a few things, Christianity, but also the Wiccan Raid. I think the Wiccan Raid philosophically and theologically doesn't make a lot of sense, but that doesn't mean it's cool to just screw people over, right? It's not cool. The other part of this is that blind hedonism all the time is not cool. I see this a lot with ex-Christians, right? They leave Christianity, they get into this stuff, and they go, well, I'm not a Christian anymore, so I'm gonna have my like breaking Amish period where they, they get really hedonistic, they get really into sex, drugs, all this stuff. Now, I'm not saying you need to wait until marriage to kiss people, right? I'm not that type of gal, but at the same time, hedonism isn't always helpful, right? When we're on our journey, we're trying to discover our true will. We're trying to follow a path. And oftentimes these really hedonistic things are not something that is helping us do that, right? A lot of the time they are distractions and they mess us up and they throw us off the path, right? Hedonism isn't necessarily bad because of the acts themselves, it's that the acts actually distort our ability to have the path we want to get and get the results that we are trying to get. As well, a lot of Western morality is actually from esotericism and paganism in particular, right? A lot of these philosophers that became the basis of Western morality were pagan. Plato, Aristotle, all of them, they were pagan. And so these ideas of morals and virtues that we have culturally, a lot of the times aren't even from Christianity. They're from paganism. And I think as pagans, we should remember that and look at like, oh wait, there were people writing about morality and paganism. It is actually a huge part of paganism historically. The next thing I want to discuss is kind of a theological thing, and that would be the distinction between working with and worshiping spirits. So I think in the occult side of things, we use this term work with in places where I actually don't think it's accurate. So if you are someone into deity work, into polytheism, you are honestly worshiping spirits, right? You are developing a devotion to them. You are venerating them with your ancestors. You're not working with them. They're not your co-workers. You're venerating them. You're honoring them. This term working with, we should remove from the context of any spiritual relationship that is not just literally that transactional working with. Working with, I feel like makes sense if we're talking about these lesser spirits, these lower spirits that you like make, transactional interactions with, right? For any spirit you're devoted to or honoring, that's not working with. I think that term is very cold. And I think that we should only use that term when we're actually having that style of relationship, right? I think we should be specific with the types of terms we're using, right? Like if you're venerating an angel, that's not working with. But if you're, say, working with some lesser spirit, like a jinn, like let's talk about jinns. Like you're not worshiping a jinn. No one's venerating jinn. If you're doing jinn stuff and jinn conjurations, you're working with the jinn. That fits, but it doesn't fit if we're talking about a deity that you claim you are really attached to and you leave offerings to and pray to, right? I think we should use our terms more accurately because I think saying work with and then talking about these gods does lead people in the wrong direction, right? They think that these gods are really transactional and they get into this idea of like what I like to call the spiritual ATM, right? Like you put in ritual, you put in incense, you get anything you want. And I think that's just not a good model when it comes to honoring a deity. And I see it in all the spaces, and I think we should just be more careful with how we phrase things and when we use certain terms and when we don't. This is the point that's going to get me in a little bit of trouble, but it's the hard truth. And that would be that esotericism, paganism, mysticism, and the ideas that come out of these, the concepts that come out of these, the beliefs that come out of these, and what they enter into your life are always going to align with ever-changing cultural, political sensitivities. I try not to get political in my YouTube videos. I do sometimes on Twitter, I do sometimes in my podcast, but I try to keep it out of these. But I think this needs to come up because I see this all the time. People assume that the ancient pagans, the ancient mystics, agreed with them politically. And oftentimes they didn't, right? Oftentimes there are things in these traditions that are not ever-changing sensibilities, because these sensibilities, they're always changing, right? They're not really rooted in anything. They change, they evolve. They're, what was problematic a year ago is super problematic now. What's cool now is gonna be problematic a year ago. And I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. I think it's exhausting. And I think that it harms our ability to have good conversations about spirituality, right? Like, I'm sorry, if there's a theological truth, that may not align with what is politically correct. It just may not. Truth does not work like that. And a lot of these traditions, they don't. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Our current cultural morals are perhaps not the best morals of all of history, right? And I know people will be mad that I said this, but I think it's just the truth, right? The ancient pagans were not 2022 people, and that doesn't make them bad. It doesn't make their ideas bad, but I think it's something we should remember. This next point is something about historicism, and that would be that all these people, these big, occult, important texts are accredited to, actually wrote them. So the example I want to use for this is Solomon. So a lot of occult literature has been attributed to Solomon. Yes, that's Solomon. The guy from the Bible, the Quran, that guy. People have attributed like a ton of grimoires to him. I've seen Islamic text attributed to him. I've seen Jewish texts. I've seen Hermetic texts. I've seen Christian, all this stuff. The guy did not write all of that. There was a big thing historically where people would credit a really famous occultist or mystic with what they wrote to make it seem more credible. You see this as well with Agrippa. So Agrippa was a real person. Agrippa was a real occultist. There's no debate about that. King Solomon, there's more of a debate about, right? But Agrippa was a real guy. So he wrote the 3 books of occult philosophy. But there's this other thing called the 4th book of occult philosophy, and it's sold separately. You'll notice this. It's always packaged separately. And you want to know why? It's very unlikely Agrippa actually wrote that book. There are a lot of differences, and it just doesn't make sense when you really look at it, right? And that doesn't mean these texts are bad, right? A lot of these texts I read, I use, I recommend all the time. But just because something's accredited to someone doesn't mean they actually read it. Doesn't mean they actually wrote it. There's also interesting cases like the Shams al-Marif, a text that I'm reading now, and I'm making a video about in the future. Just wait on it. It's a very controversial, infamous, esoteric document, and the person who it's attributed to obviously wrote some of it, but what happened is the people who followed his traditions added more to it later, but it's not clear who added what, and with time the text evolved to the point where there's multiple editions, there's multiple volumes, the translations have big gaps between them, and that's because his followers added to it later. They didn't clarify what they wrote and what the original guy wrote. And so you get this like situation where some of these texts are kind of hodgepodge, some are accredited wrong, and they're still worth reading, they're still worth trying. A lot of this stuff still works, but I think it is a historicism note that we need to remember. The next thing I wanted to talk about is something that you will see discussed every holiday ever, and that would be that all of Christianity is stolen from paganism. This isn't true. Now, there are a lot of Christian traditions that are very objectively from paganism, right? There's no good case against some of this stuff being pagan. It obviously was. When Christianity came to Europe, it thought it would be easier to syncretize local traditions than to completely uproot them, because obviously people didn't want to give up their culture and their holidays completely. Obviously, some culture was destroyed and removed, but largely they syncretized. And that's the thing. So these pagan traditions bleed in, but they're not copy-pasted. And as well, a lot of these Christian things are partially Christian and partially pagan, right? It's complicated. It's syncretism, and all religions do this. And this leads to my second half of this point, and it's that Christianity is not the only Abrahamic religion to do this. This is a point that a lot of people are scared to say, and that would be that both Islam and Judaism did the same thing at various points. All religions take from what is before them. I don't like the word stolen because a lot of the time it's not entirely stolen, right? It's syncretized, it's mixed in. But to claim that any of the Abrahamic religions have no pagan influence is just a lie. And to claim that everything Christian is not originally Christian, that's also a lie. Typically, these historic things are complex, nuanced, and multifaceted, and that's exactly what it is in this case. We have this idea online that you can choose whatever deity you want to worship. And I would say this is like 50% true. So this is like a half-truth. This isn't an entire lie. And the real truth is you choose which deities you want to reach out to, you want to contact, but not all deities are going to vibe with you, right? In the ancient world, people did not worship every single god. They didn't. They worshiped specific ones. If you look at living polytheistic traditions, this is true too, right? People focus on specific things. So this is the thing. You can choose up to an extent, but the spirit has to want you in, has to pull you in. There's a really extreme variation of this in ATR style stuff where like you don't actually get to pick which spirit you want or at all. The priest is divination and tells you which one, which I think is a little extreme. I think that's a little overkill. But some spirits are not going to like you, right? Some deities are not your deity. And with time, you'll discover who they are and who they are not. But just know, not everyone is on your spiritual team. So, yeah. As well, you will sometimes get revelation sent to you where it's very clear you need to honor a specific deity, even if it's not one that you would have personally selected, right? Listen to what you are given and allow your spiritual path to guide you, right? Allow the journey to take you. I think we sometimes have expectations for what we want our spirituality to be, and that creates resistance against what is actually meant to be, right? And where our journey is meant to go. The next point sort of circles back to what I was saying at the top of the video about there being no morals. And that would be that this idea that metaphysical evil is not real. Metaphysical evil is real. Every single mystic tradition has an explanation for metaphysical evil and has it in its system. This idea that there is no metaphysical evil is just, it's wrong, and I don't know, it's one that I think you can just open your eyes and figure out is wrong, right? Clearly there is evil, right? There is evil, there is good, they exist. I think they're a lot more complicated than people make it out to be, 100%. I think it's way more complicated than people think. But metaphysical evil is real. It exists in every tradition for a reason. Typically, if something is in every single religious tradition, there's a reason why, right? If so many people have had the same revelation, there's probably some truth to it. Furthermore, another lie that we see in the spiritual community is that there is no such thing as truth. Everything is valid. Now, the only tradition that kind of full-chestedly argues this would be, I guess, like chaos magic. But for some reason, this is a belief that the entire internet seems to have taken, right? I see this all the time. People will give their opinions and they'll say, well, every path is valid. No, not everything is valid. Not everything is good. Not everything is valid. I want to take the word valid and put it in my arm and throw it out the window. That's not true. There are some spiritual paths that make more sense than others, that are more theologically coherent than others, and there are some things that are just not true. I know that's hard to accept for some people, but that's the reality. This is the thing. All of mysticism has been people trying to discover truth. There is a reason why Blavatsky was famously quoted saying, the highest form of religion is truth. We are all trying to get it. I think it's good to discuss a bunch of paths because fundamentally, I think we're little-brained and we don't know everything. I think that all these religions are people trying to understand this mystic inner tradition that has existed through all the ages that we just don't get yet. And so that's why I think it's important to explore multiple perspectives, look into multiple perspectives, and experiment yourself, right? That's why I think spirituality should be driven by esotericism and by mysticism, not just like listening to what someone has to say. But that doesn't mean things are wrong. I think the truth exists. I just think we don't fully understand it. And I think that that's the point of all of this, right? And I think when we just sit there and we say, well, everything's valid, I think we are kind of hurting our ability to get to that truth because fundamentally it's something we all want to understand. And I think we need to be willing to say, hey, maybe some things are not true and maybe the truth does exist. Because if we don't have something guiding us, what's the point of us interacting as a community? Like, why are we interacting as a community if we aren't interacting to learn something from each other and to get to the truth of these mysteries? They're called the mysteries for a reason, right? Mysteries implies that you can eventually solve it and understand something, which means, yeah, not everything is valid. Unless, I guess, chaos magic is true, but even then that would mean a bunch of stuff isn't valid too. So not everything is valid. Now I have one final point, and it is one that I wish I could yell in the face of every single person, and honestly should be yelled at me. And that would be that spiritual labels should not dictate your entire path. Now, spiritual labels are something that everyone kind of has. And when you're new to this stuff, I think a lot of people Google like list of occult traditions, list of pagan traditions, and they read through them and they just immediately pick one that aligns with them and that they like the most. And I don't think that's a really effective way to figure out your path. I think that when people are new to this stuff, they are seekers. They are finding their path. And I think we are always seekers to some extent. I think that we are on a journey, right? I think that the journey is real, right? We're on a movement from place to place. And that means that very often we will have mystic experiences and mystic revelations that completely throw us a curveball and make us reconsider everything. And if you are married to a spiritual label that you picked early on, you may have an experience that throws that out the window. And what's going to happen is you are going to be so married to this label that you're not going to accept that experience and you're going to create this resistance that didn't need to be there. I think spiritual labels are best used to explain what you believe to others. But on your core, you should not let a label dictate your practice. As a culture, I think we are really label focused currently, and I think it's often to our detriment. The human experience is complicated, and it is very natural to want to taxonomize things, put things into little boxes, but that's not how the world works, and that's not how the spiritual world works either. This stuff is complicated, and I think that labeling has a function, has a utility, but fundamentally your journey should be about you and the divine, not about some ism that you particularly like. So that's all I wanted to say. These are the biggest lies that I think are told. If you guys feel like there's any other lies that the community tells you, comment them below. I'd be curious your opinions on this conversation because There were some more things I wanted to talk about that kind of didn't make the cut for this video, because then this video will be like 2 hours long, and I don't think anyone wants to sit through that. I mean, maybe some of you do, but I think for a lot of people that would be boring. So maybe I'll make a part 2 for this in the future. I wanted to get a lot of this off my chest. I think that people are given a lot of bad information, and that bad information extends beyond someone saying the property of a crystal wrong, right? I think there's a lot of stuff in this community that's toxic, that's wrong, and that misleads people. So if you guys have any things you want me to point out in another video, comment them below. I'm curious to see the conversations on this one. Like, comment, subscribe, and if you ring the bell for 93 days and do all the things, you'll meet your holy guardian angel, and you'll never need to know if people are lying to you again. Also, if you want to support me, I am Georgina Rose, or Darling. I am on every platform ever under the sun. And if you want to support me, Patreon is the way to do that. If you join my Patreon, you get an extra video every month, a ritual guide every month. They're like 20 pages long of original rituals that I have written, and they're different every month. They're fun. You get to join my Telegram groups. You can talk with my other subscribers and have nice conversations about this stuff. And if you're a high enough tier, you can meet with me about once a month for private spiritual consulting, coaching, that type of stuff. I'll talk to you one-on-one and help you solve your spiritual problems and, you know, tell you where you should go next in your path. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right.